Well, welcome back, everyone. We're not in the shop at the moment. Instead, we are taking a little detour to my overcrowded living room where I just added yet another piece of useless furniture. This was actually something I had not intended to get. This came by way of my local radio club. I was talking to one of the other club members, and there was a donation for a television that someone wanted to make to the club, and the other member wanted an idea of if it was actually worth picking it up, given that they would have to store it and it was kind of large, and they wanted to know if it was even worth however much they could potentially sell it for, since all of our donations tend to get auctioned off so that all the club members can have a chance to try and buy it, raise some funding for the club, etc., etc. And they sent me pictures of it, and I'd never seen one like it before, and they told me, oh, this is a Natalie Kalmus Television. A what? I'd never heard of anything like that, so I did a quick Google search, and the only things I could find were that the company only existed for maybe 3 years. There are very few known examples, and even fewer pictures, and basically no company data at all. So the fact that such little information was known about these, the cabinet styles were kind of neat. Early 50s designs. This cabinet's a little on the tamer side, but they had some neat designs. And just the name Natalie Kalmus, so I'll get to who that was in a minute. It was all really interesting. And I said, yeah, it's unusual, and I'm sure somebody will want it if you can get a hold of it. I mean, it's free, obviously, and it's complete. That was the main thing, was that the set still had all of its knobs. And the photos that I could find of other Natalie Kalmus televisions basically had nothing, and in many cases they were just empty cabinets. The chassis was just totally gone. So the fact that it was still all there and intact with the back and everything and the planters, I said, yeah, heck yeah, try and get that if we can. Well, they got it, and they sent out a notice to the club and said, hey, anybody interested in this? It's going to be going up for sale. And they got nothing. Because as it turns out, I'm one of the few people in the club that actually has an interest in vintage television. And since no one else wanted it, it was unanimously decided that I would be the one to take it home. After I paid the club a nominal fee for having to store it and transport it. But hey, for $40 I can't really complain too much, because it is a really neat set. Now that that's out of the way, the more important thing is, who the heck was Natalie Kalmus, and why is her television named after them? Well, it's a little weird. So, actually, let me open the front of the set so you at least have an idea what we're dealing with. Before I preface that, this is a 21-inch black and white set. It has a rectangular picture tube. It's the only set I have that has a rectangular picture tube. It's a 21ZP4. Channels 2 through 13, standard stuff. And it's got a mahogany cabinet. It's just a neat little set. Nothing too complicated, nothing too fancy. It's got a relatively low tube count. It is a transformer set, but it doesn't weigh too much. The picture tube takes up the bulk of the space on the chassis back there. And I have already had this apart. I'm kind of filming things out of order here, but I was really excited to get into it. Anyway, Natalie Kalmus was the wife of a man named Herbert Kalmus, who was responsible for leading a team that would develop the Technicolor process. I don't know if he was directly involved with the technical side of things, but he sort of managed it from what I was able to glean from the biography and Wikipedia articles and such. Either way, he's generally credited with the development of Technicolor, and they developed several different processes over the years, and eventually the final version of Technicolor, the Technicolor process, would be the most popular. Initially, they didn't have very much success marketing it. There was very little interest in the color process because it required multiple film strips for red, green, and blue, and it was tricky and expensive, and people weren't really sure, producers at least, weren't really sure if it would really stick. So they weren't going to invest a bunch of money in paying for the rights to use the system if there wasn't going to be a huge return on it. And so Herbert Kalmus kept looking for ways to try and market it. And he got lucky because one person that was very much interested in it was Walt Disney. And Disney approached Kalmus and got the rights for the Technicolor process and produced one of his early silly symphonies in color. And that pretty much cemented the Technicolor process as being a pretty cool thing in the eyes of the public. And pretty soon there was more interest from producers and studios in using and licensing the rights for the Technicolor process, which you couldn't just outright buy the cameras and film and everything. You had to go through Technicolor to do all of that. And where Natalie Kalmus comes in, as she and Herbert had actually divorced prior to Technicolor's development, but they kind of stuck together and didn't tell anyone about it. And she sort of just, well, I'm not really sure what she really did most of the time. But what she is credited with doing is acting as a color coordinator. So when a movie studio would produce or want to produce a color film, she would try to make sure they didn't go overboard with the color system. As you can imagine, a fairly new technology like color being widely used in film is sort of like any new technology, like, say, the development of CGI for films today. Pretty heavily used, someone might say overused in some cases. When you develop a new technology like that is going to be very popular, has the ability to be very popular, you don't want to go crazy with it because people might get tired of it. And I guess Natalie was concerned that if people got a hold of her husband's process and just went absolutely nuts with it, then people would just get tired of seeing oversaturated colors, really bright brights and everything. People would want to use it to its maximum potential. And I guess she was there to sort of make sure they toned it down. Tried to do good color coordination, make sure they didn't go absolutely nuts with it, make sure everything worked well. You can think of how the Wizard of Oz turned out. That used Technicolor, and Natalie Kalmus is credited on it, as well as in every other film that Technicolor produced. As far as I know, her name was attached to. And I think even if she wasn't actually a part of the development process, she, I think, figured out how to get her name tacked onto them anyway. Something like that. There's some controversies surrounding whether or not she was actually useful in any fashion, because I guess the producers that she worked with did not like her at all, but that might have just been misogyny given the time frame. Point is, her husband was famous. She got attached to that. She made herself as a known figure, whether for good or for bad, with movie studios and helping out on Technicolor films, which I guess gives her some amount of fame. Now, that is about all we know about. We know plenty about the person. The company, unfortunately, there's basically no data. There's absolutely nothing. The company seems to have popped up around 1951 and gone bankrupt around 1953. And this was a Southern California, I think it's somewhere in California, probably Los Angeles area. A lot of electronic stuff going on there. And I'm going to assume they were purely a cabinet shop, because the chassis are off the shelf from other manufacturers. This is a Jackson chassis. I've read some other people have found versions of these sets with Muntz chassis in them, so they obviously weren't up for spending a lot of cash on the electronics. Although I understand that these were supposed to be relatively high dollar or, expensive looking sets. I mean, it does look nice. And yeah, it's a neat set, but I mean, it's not say up there with, like an RCA or something. Of course, RCA tends to build their crap like tanks, and this is more of a Jeep, I guess you could say. Either way, that being said, that's all that's really known about it. The Kalmuses came in a number of different cabinet styles, some much zanier than this, actually, with wild angles and things. Somewhere on Google I found an image of an original flyer, the only image that I could find. I'll try to put that in the video here so you can see what the heck it looks like, and I'll probably talk about the cabinet a little later. The next thing I'm actually going to wind up doing is hauling this chassis out, and I gotta say, this chassis is only held in with 2 bolts, but it is heavy. The only way I can reasonably get one of these out is to drag it out the back and then heft it on top of the set and take it all apart, because that picture tube actually weighs a lot more than you might think. The whole thing's not too bad, but the bulk of the weight is in that picture tube, and it is really tricky getting the chassis in and out, and I've already done it once each. So we'll skip over and we'll take a look at the chassis, and I have a new toy to play with to see if the CRT is any good. I'm going to apologize in advance for the slightly shaky nature of this video. I've got the chassis pulled out of the Kalmus Television, and I am running a quick test on the 21 ZP4 picture tube. I just got this nice little B&K Model 465 up and running actually just a few minutes ago. So I'm going to see how much life is left in this tube with the overseer nearby. Filaments up. Normally it says you should run these for about 3 minutes, I guess, to get everything up to temperature. But I could at least check to see if there are any shorts or anything in the unit. So we're going to flip that over, and the unit says no. We're good there. And the lights came on. It's a little premature to check the emissions, but... oh! How about that? Not even a full minute warmed up, and we're already in the good region. That's nice. Alright, let's make sure grid 2 is in the good spot, and check and see what the cutoff is. Alright, that's just a bit above 20, and our chart is saying for a 21 ZP4, where you should expect about 22 to 72, so we're right at the bottom of that range. So let's flip back over to emissions. Yeah, I mean, this, as far as I'm concerned, that ought to produce a pretty usable picture. I suppose we could do a life test real quick here. See how quickly the needle drops. Huh, it actually went up at first. Well, that is certainly pretty good, I must say. I'm happy with it anyway. I did actually use the dynamic intensifier function on the last picture tube, or the first picture tube I tested was pretty bad, and I was able to bring it back up with that function. I don't think we're going to need to use that here. This looks like it should work pretty good. So I guess the next thing to do really is going to be to unstrap this thing and get it off the chassis, because I cannot manhandle this with that 21-inch picture tube in place. It is just too awkward. And given the rather shoddy mounting system, there's only one nut holding the yoke in place right now. The whole thing's kind of... it's not great. So I'm going to loosen the clamp up there, take the socket and the magnet off, and then we'll carefully slide this out of the chassis, and I will get this down on the bench. Okay, I thought I should document this. While I'm working on the chassis for this set, I thought we'd take a look at the cabinet for the Natalie Kalmus Television that I picked up. So as far as I can tell, this particular cabinet model is known as the New Moon, and like all the other cabinet varieties, I think there were 8, they offered them in mahogany like this and a very blonde finish that seemed to be kind of popular in the early to mid-50s. Now, all of the Natalie Kalmus televisions have planters in them. Sorry, I got some screws in there right now. They're just ceramic. They're not very deep. The ad for this one actually shows them having a pair of what looks like fake ivy plants falling over the front of the cabinet. I'm sure that's real great for the finish. The finish on this actually is in pretty decent shape. It was obviously stored pretty well, although there is some junk around the edges. I'm going to wipe it all down real good and just get it clean. Probably some residue and junk on there. Oh, there's the ion trap magnet. And this particular unit has a single permanent magnet speaker down here in the cloth. And then we have this really neat door setup where we have one large overlap. And these are magnetic from what I can tell. So that's nice. So this uses a 21-inch picture tube. And the shadow mask seems to fill the entire viewing area of that. There is a little round I don't have a lot of light here. There was a little round brass button right here. I don't know if there was a logo there originally. There doesn't seem to be anything left. It looks like there might have been glue or ink or something on it. No way to tell. There's not a lot of photos of these out there on the internet. There's not even any documentation to say how many they actually produced, since the company only existed for a grand total of 2 years. Yeah, so in terms of controls, since it's the Jackson chassis only has 2 main knob sets, there and there. So your turret tuner is over here, and then power and volume is over on this guy. And the Jackson has all the other controls: brightness, horizontal and vertical lock, and I want to say vertical linearity, are all behind this spring-loaded flap right here. And they don't poke through this slot. You kind of have to reach in there to get to them. Some folks have said that they thought they might also have used... What? Anyway, as I was saying before, I got interrupted by a hairball incident. Yeah, the Jackson chassis, the controls for the front section here are tucked very close to the inside, so you do have to stick your fingers through the front to actually get to them. And interestingly, the horizontal lock control is not a potentiometer, but instead you have the top hex of a ferrite slug for a tunable coil, which is a little interesting, because that means if it's a little stuck, you actually have to have a proper hex head tool to rotate it. You can't just twist it with your fingers. But presumably, if it stays put, you shouldn't have to worry about it. There's not much going on the inside of the cabinet. There are 3 ventilation points. There's the ones in the bottom, and there are 2 little ones in either side that actually exit into the shoulders here underneath the planters. Kind of interesting. And, excuse me, do you mind? There is also an internal loop antenna. I can actually flip the cabinet around here once I get the mischievous one off there. Hopefully this is visible. Sort of. So there is a kind of a butterfly shaped or bow tie shaped antenna here that has been stapled into the top. I don't know if this is factory. It is relatively well centered, and the back panel for the set here does have a corresponding notch that is fairly cleanly cut. So I would say that this is probably original. And the twin lead coming off of it does go down to where there should have been a terminal post for antenna and ground. Unfortunately, that got broken off at some point, and they actually cut off this end of things. The twin lead is still attached to the radio, to the TV chassis, and what remains of the terminal board is hanging off the end of it. So I'm going to see if I can't repair or replace this. They also apparently broke off the connection for the power cord, which from the holes there I would say was supposed to be mounted directly to this board. Instead, there was a wooden block screwed into place right here with a little piece of masonite on it, and then the interlock plug socket was attached to that with some wires hanging out the end going to the shed. Kind of quickie dick repair looking. The cabinet also has the schematic for the Jackson, which is how I figured out what it was, because it had the model numbers on it. This is a 217A from what I can tell. And there are also 2 tags in here. And we'll see if I can't get a better light source. There we go. So the tag has, oh god, that's kind of bright. Model number, his serial number, and unfortunately, if there was markings on these final assembly of the Eclec-Tronics, all of that is faded into oblivion. There is also a matching tag down here on the bottom. This particular unit is listed as a model 421VK with an M all the way at the end of it, and its serial number is 67283. And that number is also found on the back of the radio chassis, as well as the back of the panel here. The model number's faded out, but it looks like they hand wrote the model number. But yeah, the bag is in pretty good shape. The wrong screws were inserted into it. That's no big deal. There's nothing too crazy going on over here except for the permanent magnet speaker down there. And yeah, overall, I mean, the cabinet construction is not too bad. I'd just say some of the electronics things were probably a little cheaper. I don't know how much these retailed for originally, but I've been told they were more intended for more expensive folks than the regular population. Of course, that might just be total speculation, and I'm sure it is. But just judging from the electronics, they don't seem like they wanted to spend a lot of money on the actual TV portion of it, and they put more of the work into the association with the technical color process through the Kalmus name, and of course, the rather unique styling of the cabinets. This is probably one of the tamer models. But that being said, I should probably get back to the chassis. Okay, so due to some unforeseen issues with the new lavalier microphone I bought, being that it has a different connection setup compared to the one on my GoPro camera, there's no audio for the next few sections of this, sadly. So I'm just going to have to try and remember off the top of my head what the hell I was talking about. So I got the chassis up on the counter here, and the first thing I noticed was that the whole setup for the CRT holder, the yoke assembly, as well as the straps on the front, are very hodgepodge looking, in that it was obvious that the chassis was never intended to hold a 22-inch 1-inch CRT, probably a 12-inch at best, and so they used wood blocks to prop up the CRT, and then there's a little metal hook there at the front with a rubber pad to sort of catch the lower edge of the front of the bell. And the straps on either side are kind of bent down and sagging from the weight, and it's special. There's actually only 2 machine screws holding the yoke onto the wooden block up there, and when I got it, there were no nuts holding the screws on, so it just sort of flopped around uselessly. Yeah, it was pretty awful. Now, on the whole, the chassis itself was pretty clean, except for the tubes in the back. I'm pretty sure I eventually got around to cleaning those. But what I'm pointing out is that the driver tube for the flyback is actually outside the cage, and the grid connection for it is coming out of the high voltage cage and running to the tube through a hole in it. It's just kind of odd. Normally, the driver tube lives inside the cage with the 1B3 GT high voltage rectifier. In this case, it does not, and I think it's a 6SN7 that operates the horizontal oscillator is sitting right there in front of it. And there are also a few tubes trapped underneath the yoke, including the 5U4 rectifier tube, and I think another 6SN7 and some other things. And again, I'm pointing out that nice little woodblock feature there. The chassis overall is pretty sparse. Not a lot of tubes on there. It's got these neat little sort of half dome-topped IF shielded tubes. Haven't seen that kind before. And thankfully all the shields are there. The high voltage cage there, I think originally had a tab to lock it down, like a threaded stud. That's pretty well broken off and gone. It is, however, internally fused on the B+ supply, which is nice. Although the high voltage lead coming out of the cage there, I guess they never bothered to put a rubber grommet to protect it, and instead used friction tape wrapped around the lead to help protect it. Transformer on this thing is also rather beefy. Yeah, but here we can see the other 4 tubes trapped back there. I can't quite remember what those 2 are for,
because the audio and IF are all up front. So I'm pointing at the 5U4 there. I think those in the back are for the vertical, or I can't quite remember since I haven't had the chassis flipped over in a bit. No, wait, sorry. The vertical drive is those two lone tubes out there ahead of the high voltage cage. Some of the stuff down there underneath the yoke, I believe, is part of the sync separator circuits or something along those lines. That's just above some of the mica caps I had to replace. Tuner's only got two tubes up front. Very simple little design. I had it open because it's a turret style tuner, and I really should have replaced the twin lead at that time, but I didn't, and put it all back together and sealed it up again, which took some doing, and then realized I forgot to reattach the twin leads, so I wound up splicing some on later on. I believe I'm also poking at the control for the discriminator for the FM. Or no, that might be the can right there. Again, this is all... Trying to do this from memory sucks. Oh, and the CRT socket. Yeah, this is an interesting... It's just a half. Instead of bothering to make the entire socket, they just did the pins that are used, which is probably smart, save some materials. But the fact that the socket sits up higher by about 3/4 of an inch means that the cables are stretched a little bit. And I'm guessing they must have just pulled this chassis off the shelf and then jacked it up with the wood, because now they had to have a way to keep the wires off of the rectifier tube, so they put a self-tapping wood screw with a washer into the side of that wood block, and then just sort of hooked the wiring over it. Very, very high quality there. But yeah, high voltage lead was in good shape, no insulation damage. Yeah, I can see the just a whole bunch of friction tape insulating it there. Not all that great. Now, the twin lead on this one, this set actually has an internal adjustable antenna that slides back and forth along the inside, sort of a butterfly shape. Unfortunately, whoever removed the back from the set or serviced it last destroyed the original terminal board for the antenna connections and disconnected the internal antenna and sort of hastily solder spliced the twin leads back together to bypass it. I went ahead afterward and reattached the internal antenna to that lead and then made an additional new splice out for a new terminal board, which unfortunately I didn't have at the time that I put the back on. So that's something for future me or whoever winds up with this TV to deal with. But yeah. Okay, so now we're taking a look underneath the chassis as I got it, and it is cavernous. It's got to be 3 inches deep, and there is not a lot going on under here, which is great. Because this has no can capacitors on top, no multi-sections that you have to cut open or do whatever, and it's actually just got the turret tuner there, which I don't have a bunch of sets with turret tuners, so this is kind of neat. I finally got to play with one and get it working. Hear the clunk sound it makes. I actually tore apart that entire tuner and cleaned all those contacts. Kind of pointless considering I'm only ever using one channel, but I figured I might as well in case they sneakily stuffed some capacitor or resistor in there that might have needed replacing, which there are some components tucked up in there, because the only way to get to the tube sockets on top is to take the drum assembly out, and it's actually retained by a pair of wire springs on either end of it, and it's tight in there. Getting it back on was not easy. Anyway, as far as electrolytics, this set has 3 main multi-sections. There's one in the bottom left just above the power transformer, and the 2 I'm stabbing at on the right side of the chassis. One of them is a double section, and then I think the other, another, actually no, yeah, those two up there are both double section electrolytics, and then an additional multi-section at the bottom left. All of them were very easy to remove and replace. And then there were not a whole lot of wax capacitors because most of the small value caps in this set anyway, in the IF string at the bottom there, were ceramic disc, which was a big surprise to me for 1951. So a lot of the tiny finicky caps that I would normally have to replace with axial-leaded yellow body caps, I just left alone. They were perfectly fine. However, I did not have as much luck with the brown molded caps. There were some that were, I looked at them and they were obviously paper, higher value, so I swapped them out. There were a few of them that were lower value, towards the size that you would assume that they would be micas. I checked the schematic listing and I couldn't quite tell if they were mica or not. It suggested they might be, but the size and shape basically said, no, I'm absolutely a paper cap in disguise. So after having to deal with some issues, I just wound up shotgunning those as well. I put in brand new micas in place of all of the other small value caps for the horizontal and vertical oscillator sections. There's one or two in the IF string. And I went through and I got rid of all of those. And that has netted me some darn good stability as far as watching it goes. And there's one more wax guy there. There's just not a lot of capacitors. One thing I did note, however, was that this chassis has effectively zero shielding between sections. The IF string and audio string are stuck in between the tuner and the transformer. And I mean, the chassis is, effectively a shield, but I'm used to seeing some dividers or metal plates around the IF to kind of keep things separated. But this chassis had none of that. But it was clean. I'll give it that. Everything was fairly neat and organized. Very easy to work on. One curious thing, though, is the horizontal oscillator is at the back of the chassis. However, the actual tunable slug, or the tank circuit that runs it, is a tunable slug that sticks out of the front panel of the TV and is accessible through a hatch on the front. And that connects back to a fixed, what I assumed was mica postage stamp capacitor, and I wound up just replacing that with a silver mica for future proofing, really. Or no, sorry, it wasn't a silver mica, it was just a little bit bigger than that. I wound up using a standard yellow cap, and it's worked out perfectly fine. I did find a shorted mica later on in the sync separator circuit that was causing some severe problems in the video signal, basically killing the video signal entirely. There are some adjustments on the back, but not a lot. Yeah, I think I'm poking around at some of the other wax caps that are in the chassis there. But no, the Jackson chassis, extremely simple to work on. Plenty of room to mount things if you needed to. I considered mounting a power resistor for the power supply, but thus far the set has run just fine on standard line voltage in my area. Although I did get the fuse that came factory installed on the back panel set up and working again, as someone decided to bypass the fuse with a piece of bus wire for some odd reason instead of just putting a good fuse in it. I don't know, maybe it was drawing an excessive amount of current and they were just tired of having to replace a blown fuse all the time. It just kind of strangely defeated a safety feature. The original set also had a standard quick disconnect attached to the backboard for a cheater cord, effectively. However, it seems that someone maybe didn't think it through, because the backer can't really go with the chassis given how heavy it is, so they took it off the back and then screwed it to a piece of wood, and then screwed that piece of wood with the jack to the back of the TV cabinet in the way of the chassis. So that means I had to remove the power socket before I could remove the chassis from the cabinet. and then the wiring going from that socket into the chassis was very poor, and I couldn't quite tell if that was something that was done at the factory when they realized they made a mistake, or if that was something a serviceman did to get around an issue. It just very odd. I think that about wraps it up for this. The only control I did have a problem with and still do is the volume control. Besides the knob just not fitting on it worth a damn, it is very loose, and I'm not sure whether that's a mechanical looseness or if the carbon track on the inside is just heavily worn down. But you do have to wiggle it a little bit to get good contact, and I did use deoxit on all these controls. So just the volume control gives me issues. But let's see how the chassis turned out now. Okay, apparently the last two clips that I recorded had no audio because the external microphone I used was not correctly recognized by the camera for some reason. Anyway, all the electrolytics in the set have been replaced. That probably took me less than half an hour. It was quick. This guy over here has been replaced by two 47 microfarad 450 volt guys. I reused the ground connection on this terminal lug over here and then simply spliced in the red wire from that. I thought about attaching them directly to the terminals on the sockets, but because of the amount of heat that gets generated in that area, I didn't want the caps to be directly on them. And I know heat rises and all that, but the surrounding area of the chassis does also get kind of warm. So I placed them up away from the other components. This guy here, there was already a hole for the attaching that multi-section, so I just reused it, and the self-tapping sheet metal screw, and reused the original wiring going to the socket. So that made everything nice and clean. This guy, the 80, that was originally over here, this is actually a replacement from what I can tell. It was screwed in place. The other one was actually riveted to the chassis, and I had to drill it out. And there was evidence that there were originally two riveted capacitors, and one of them was sliced off. Or they subbed that in, and I couldn't quite tell. Either way, I don't have an 80 microfarad 450 volt cap. What I do have is a 68 microfarad from a different project. So I have temporarily stuck that in here. And because I was in the area, I also replaced this 0.1 microfarad capacitor. I'm not going to touch the other ones yet, because I want to see what this thing can do just with these new electrolytics. Oh, and the triple section that was over here, the 2010 150. I swapped that out with this nice little terminal board, and just like those guys, I reused the original wires and ran them nice and clean to their new capacitors, or all Nishikons, and tried to keep the wiring right where it was, the lead dress tucked nicely against the chassis for grounding and RF shielding and all that good stuff. So now what we need to do is flip it over, and I'm going to yank my test CRT and stick it in the yoke and see what this thing can do. So I was originally attempting to use the CRT out of a small portable test unit that I bought. The cabinet for it was in shambles. But the CRT itself was supposed to be a fairly standard universal tester for most electromagnetic deflection sets, but it also has built-in deflection plates, so you don't even need to use a yoke. You can just hook it up externally, and it should be able to drive itself. But then the box also has a yoke in it with alligator clips, so you can hook it up, blah, blah, blah. Unfortunately, my picture tube is a rectangle. This picture tube is not a rectangle. And from what I understand from Bob Anderson and some other folks on the radio forum, the simple answer is no, this CRT will not work with this set, and I literally wasted 15 minutes of my time trying to get it to do something. So, yeah, we're just gonna skip this, and I'm just gonna stick the original CRT back into it and see if I can't get it to work. Progress time. The 5 AXP4 test picture tube apparently has some issues. I could not get it to work. I was able to get the high voltage back up to about 11 to 12 kilovolts as per the manual. I have not finished recapping the IF strip. And I'll have to put a picture in here. When I attempt to inject a signal from my little buddy down there, the B&K 1076, it freaks out in the worst imaginable way, and I get some buzzing of some component down in there, and I'm wondering if there's one of the small mica caps is actually shorting out when it does get sync pulses, or I don't know. It makes an angry buzzing noise. I'm guessing there's a component that's shorting when it does receive a signal, but on both the channel selector and the IF, if I find the right spot where it picks up the IF signal, it'll freak out at both those points, and basically everything gets smooshed together and looks like a Rorschach. So I'm going to have to deal with that, but I've recapped the horizontal and vertical sections. We have deflection, we have a raster. Not a ton of brightness. I mean, we're at the very end of things here, but the fact is, I think this should be watchable if I can get a signal into it. Yeah, all the controls are functional. The height and everything does work as it's supposed to. Assuming you're supposed to crank this up, and then the vertical linearity control there. But, yeah, it works so far. We shall see. I need to clean all these control pots too, they're a little crusty. And the the channel selector too. Where's my... I had a pair of pliers for selecting. There they are. Sorry, I'm having to freehand this. Kind of a mess there. I thought I had snow on one of these. That one, I think. Yeah, snow on there. Either way, progress. I'm going to continue recapping the chassis, and yeah, we'll see what happens. Oh, I suppose we gotta flip this off and see how it does. That's lasting a lot longer than it should. Why is that? That tiny spot of fluorescent should not be there. I've got it grounded. The grounding with that piece of tape may not be good enough. I'll have to come back to that. Well, after fighting with the chassis a little bit and replacing a number of additional capacitors, we've gotten somewhere. I'm currently broadcasting on channel 4 on my B&K 1076. I've also got the tone active, and I think the tuner's on channel 4. I honestly can't tell. It's having a bit of an issue with the vertical lock, as you can see here. It's very jumpy. Does not really want to stay put. Also, the signal looks like shit. Yeah, so there's some issues, to say the very least. But I mean, horizontal seems to do okay. The vertical, though, not that great. There are still some postage stamp capacitors in the deflection circuits that I'm thinking may actually be like mica mold papers. They're Sangamo branded, but the last few types of that I replaced were actually reading on my own meter, like 16,000 ohms, which is no good, especially not for a circuit that's seeing 100 plus volts DC. So I think I'm going to go in there, and especially since I want to be able to watch this with some regularity, I'm gonna replace the vertical and horizontal deflection circuit capacitors with silver micas, brand new ones, 1,000 volt rated, just for a little bit of peace of mind, and to eliminate some additional variables. Because I don't know if they're any good against moisture or what have you. Normally micas are pretty stable. Don't really know if these are micas. They may or may not be. The other thing is, I haven't tested any of the tubes in this. I usually just see if it works with the tubes it's got, and I've gotten pretty lucky. It's possible there's some tubes in this set that are basically near the end of their life, and they can't do a very good job with the image. Blah, 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 blah. And the other thing is the contacts on the tuner here. Let's see if I can get it to... Yeah, you can see it's, if I move around the stick there, it's not super happy. I'm thinking part of the problem is I have not cleaned the contacts on the turret tuner. Let's see, where did my pliers go? Maybe I can... Oh, and also, I know it's... The audio section there seems to be working okay. Let's see if we... what we've got here. I left the knobs upstairs, so... yeah. Well, shoot, where did we have the, we had the trace somewhere around here. Is it that? I don't think that's it. No. Well, let's change the channel on the, Oh, hey, wow, look at that. Holy crap. What did I don't know what the hell I did. Okay, so crappy contacts, very good chance. According to the B&K, we're on channel 5. The vertical hold is still a little jittery. Oh, no, there we go. Very nice. Linearity is still a little... hang on a second. How bright can I dim this? Not much. That's basically full brightness right there. Where's contrast? Contrast is this guy right here. I really hate how the contrast goes. I cleaned all of these and they're still a little iffy. Okay. That's really good. Height. Now, the only thing I don't know on these sets is the shadow mask seems to completely envelope this. I'm going to guess they wanted the image to go all the way to the edges so that you don't get any dark areas. So this would probably be pretty accurate. Fine-tuning. Well, the fine-tuning is not really going to do... well, it kind of does something. It made it a little... well, whatever. But as you can see, we're getting a little bit of jitteriness if I touch this, and then it stops being happy. But yeah. Cool. We have an image. Now let's see what happens if I switch off of channel 5. Okay. Great. That's good. Do I still want to replace those micas? I'll reconsider that. I think maybe the next step is going to be to... well, the next step is definitely going to be to take a look at the turret tuner, get under there, and scrub all those contacts so that they're nice and clean. And then I'm going to look at the alignment procedure on this. I have yet to actually attempt sweep alignment on a TV, just because I have marker generators, and I have sweep generators, and all the necessary equipment to actually do it, except that the marker generators that I have are not too fancy, and they can only generate one marker, and you generally want 2 or more on a trace. And I'm not well versed enough in the use of the equipment to really feel confident going through this. I can do a basic AM alignment. That is, if there's coils in there that need to be peaked, I can set them for a single frequency. That's pretty easy to do. I do feel a little anxious dicking around with the video IF and messing around with the waveforms in there. If I can get a stable picture like this for home viewing, that's fine. Although I would like it if channel 4 actually worked correctly. Speaking of which, let's set it to channel 4. And you see we get nothing. And let's see... which way do you think channel 4 is? Is that supposed to be channel 4? Or is that supposed to be channel 4? I'm going to guess that that's supposed to be channel 4. Okay, well, something is definitely not quite right there. Can we... okay, let's try channel 3. And we lost it. Nope. This is what happens when you don't have the knob on this. You have no idea where anything is. Okay, then back to channel 5. Or maybe channel 6. Let's see. Do we get anything on channel 6? Well, oh. Yeah, we do. Okay. So that's channel 6-ish. Yeah. Okay, so, and obviously yeah. Well, we're still going to have the audio signal because that's just going straight through the IF. It's not actually being broadcast alongside the video signal. It's just blasting through, what I think, 4.5 megahertz? I forget. So we're going to hear it on every channel regardless if we have a video signal going through proper. Anyway, yeah, that's a good stopping point for now. Tomorrow, or I think I'll do some more cleaning up work on the bottom, and I think I'll also put the 6SN7 tubes that are part of the deflection circuits on my TV too, and see how they rate. I have plenty of backups. Okay, I'm going to dim the lights here in a minute. I just finished putting in all the new silver mica capacitors. And now it is time to test this thing out. I've got my transmitting setup a little ways away, not using the VCR directly right now, so I want to see if this thing can pick up the signal from my Blonder Tongue AM40 modulator. I tested it earlier with my GE portable set, and it worked really well with that, and we're only 10 feet away, so it should work pretty well with this, just using the twin lead hanging off the chassis. Crossing my fingers that those mica caps in it didn't throw anything too out of whack. It should function pretty well. I suppose, though, we should slap the channel and other controls on there just so that I have access to them. Which one? I still haven't cleaned these things up. Something about this plastic results in a really nasty white some sort of growth. Must be a chemical reaction on there. So that should be our clunker. Perfect. Over here. And this, something about this knob that just feels really cheesy. The insert in the end of it, it looks like it's made for a D shaft, and it's got a little flat spring in there. The shaft is actually slotted to grab a hold of that little bent piece of metal. It just, I don't know, it's not really confidence inspiring. It just seems very last second, and it also doesn't really want to go on there. It looks like there's something blocking the inside of this. It's filled with junk. How? This is the on-off switch, for crying out loud. Yeah, that doesn't work at all. Okay, well, we're going to forget the on-off switch. This thing should already be on. And we're going to turn the volume up. And I forget exactly what this knob does. Let's see, height, brightness, vertical. That's probably contrast. So that's probably contrast, and we have channel and fine tuning. So that's on. Let's get these turned off. And then I'll apologize for the sound of my heater in the back. It is a little bit cold in the shop today. It's been a little while since I fired this up. That's not too great. Oh, there we go. Just fine tuning here. No, okay. So I think I'm transmitting on channel 9. It
looks like there was something there. Where am I at? I can't nope. Oh, there it is. I can hear it. Okay, there's our channel, and it is on 9.
Continuous testing toughened its chassis, and strenuous quality control made it so airtight that you had to crack open a window to close the doors. The earliest, most collectible Beetles had small, split rear windows, but as the car matured, vision out of the back window improved. Other than that, Beetles looked virtually unchanged for almost 60 years. Here, in the company's museum, an early 1938 model sits in a row next to a Beetle built 50 years and 20 million cars later. They appear nearly identical.
So audio's not bad.
In our time, we'll return.
The equations that surround mass and momentum aren't as much fun as the
Everything else, not so much.
crash test dummies don't go on family vacations. But the people who buy Volkswagen Jets do. That's why our engineers designed the new jet with dual airbags, front and rear crumple zones, side impact beams, and a rigid passenger safety cage. Velocity, mass, and momentum don't mean much to children, and we plan on keeping it that way.
In our time continues. The startling successes of Volkswagen in North America did
Oh,
not go
okay. The
unnoticed.
horizontal frequency was so far off it wasn't even
Japanese
funny.
carmakers saw an opportunity in the small car category that Beetle had created.
Look at that.
And beginning
It's
in
not
the
great.
60s, the major
I don't have a proper antenna hooked up to it, but we are... Oh, this antenna is just junk. This twin lead is so badly electrical taped together.
Simple, honest design and high-quality materials.
Yeah, see that?
A low price.
When you get into
That's all I've got for an antenna.
a German car, you couldn't be in just about anything else. I mean, it's almost a cliche, but when you shut the door, it feels more solid than virtually any other car that you can get into.
And the German Autobahns, which often have no speed limit, made high-speed handling and road holding a key need.
One of the main requirements of a German car is that it be able to survive at Autobahn speeds. Now, an Autobahn speed for a Volkswagen is obviously not the 150 miles an hour that Mercedes.
I don't really care about the audio section. I know that's work. And what I'm curious about right now is this artifact up here. I believe is from the fact that I'm using a VHS player. With this out of the cabinet, I'm not quite sure if these sections here and here will be inside the shadow mask. I think most of this is being displayed, honestly. Of course, there's a whole centering assembly at the back of the yoke with the magnet and everything that I can play with to get this all about where it needs to be. But this, it seems to be very, very stable. And again, I'm not direct driving the IF stages. You can't see it, but off screen I have a low power modulator that has enough guts with a rabbit ear antenna to send a signal that this TV can pick up in the same room. It can pick up from another room. Signal degradation is a little worse. This is a bit grainy, obviously, but once this is in its cabinet and hooked up to its internal antenna, I'm sure it'll be better. It also doesn't help that the the setup that I have for my modulator, I'm not using a Balun, a proper transformer to match the impedance of the rabbit ears to the actual modulator's VHF output. So I'm sure that does not help. But the fact is, the way it is now, it works, and even with the TV only having been on less than 5 minutes, it hasn't fully warmed up and everything, it hasn't freaked out, no glitches, no twitching. I'm going to let it run for a bit and see if I get any artifacts. But honestly,
if this is how it's going to be, I'm going to try and track down, I don't know if they still make it, I'm going to see if I can't get some new twin lead to replace the antenna connections on this, because it is in such sorry shape, it really just needs to be done. And honestly, I don't see why this can't just go back in its cabinet as it is. It looks pretty good to me. I could fiddle around with all the other stages and things, but quite frankly, this is a watchable picture. And I'm pretty happy with the results. The only thing that isn't quite perfect is the fine-tuning. It looks like this has to be cranked all the way to the left. Ideally, when these are set up, the fine-tuning should be somewhere in the middle when the alignment is done, and you generally don't want it too far to either extreme to get the best picture and sound quality. But considering I'm only ever going to be broadcasting on one channel, I think it's okay. But I'm going to let this go off camera and let the VHS tape wind up and see how it fares once it's up to temperature. So I pulled the CRT back off the Jackson chassis here because I wanted to do a little bit of final cleanup around things. When I first pulled the chassis, normally I go through and I clean all the tubes up, try to get everything dusted and all that. And I kind of skipped out on that this time. I didn't really do any real cleanup. I just flipped it over and started replacing capacitors. So I went back, I cleaned these all up, and I also took the time to label each of the positions in the event that somehow the chassis and the cabinet get separated, or there's no way to identify this as a Jackson chassis, etc., etc. So the RF tuner up here has stamps in it for the two tubes on the front end, but everything else is just, I just pulled the tube out and wrote it on there as a backup. Also helps when you're sort of flailing around in the darkness, shine a flashlight there, you'd be able to see the markings and get a sense of what's supposed to be in that socket. Other things I did, I have the yoke securely mounted now. I found some good, I think they were 1032 nuts, and got these fastened down. These actually kind of sucked to put back in because the screws themselves, the tops of the screw heads are inaccessible. You'd have to take the whole yoke apart in order to get out in there. So I just took a long shaft flat blade screwdriver, put it into the side, and jammed the blade in horizontally to hold it, and then tighten the nuts up. So that's not wiggling around anymore. I did also replace the wire on the back of the CRT neck that grounds the Aquadag coating. It was just held on with a piece of, it looked like painter's tape, honestly, in a poorly grounded wire that had oxidized pretty badly. So I tinned a short length of probably 16 or 18 gauge black wire. I used a piece of good, piece of thermal tape actually. It has a very high adhesion, and I'm going to put a ring terminal on the other end of it so that when it gets screwed down, it doesn't have the ability to come loose and then just fall off of there so that the neck isn't properly grounded. I also, thanks to eBay, got myself a nice roll of twin lead for the antennas. I've got a number of television sets where the antenna lead itself is torn up or hacked apart. This one was in pretty rough shape and had been cut in a few places. I spliced it here. Once I cut it to length, I'm going to find some heat shrink to slip over that and seal this up. They'll be kept apart thanks to the, I don't know what this is some sort of plastic that's separating it. So that's good. The set does have an internal antenna, so this will wind up running to that. And then it did have an external antenna terminal board, but this is all that's left of it. And I'm not sure whether I'll really bother to put one back on there. I might. I don't have one of these terminal boards labeled antenna though, and I believe this screwed to the original back. So I'll have to see what I can do about that. I'll at least put in a pigtail. When I splice the original antenna back in, I'll probably make another connection coming out to go to well, something. I'll leave it there as an attachment point, maybe some alligator clips or some rings to attach a balun. Anyway, I got that. And the last thing I did was on the power supply. There was a piece of wire hanging out, and the disconnect for the cheater cord was just sort of crudely attached to this block, which I briefly thought might have been a factory hack job. But this actually just looks like an oops, the connector broke off the backing board and we needed to reattach it to the chassis or set somehow, so we just screwed it in. Because, I mean, this piece right here that was on there is literally just a piece of, I think that's, well, that was probably 3/16 masonite that someone chopped up. So this is, yeah, this was just kind of crap. So I decided, since the wiring already broke off on it, I just put a permanently attached modern polarized cord on there. Hot side going through the switch. And I also got the fuse replaced on the back. This set actually has a factory fuse holder, which was nice. Except it would have been better had the last person in there not bypassed it with a piece of solid bus wire. So that's been clipped out. So it has a fused primary connection to the transformer. And it's also got the stock fuse in the high voltage cage to protect that. So this is at a point where I am happy enough with its operation that it needs to go back in its cabinet, because I've got other stuff that's going to wind up on the bench here soon, and it's taking up valuable real estate. So I will meet you in the living room, and we will get this shoved back inside. And the category for worst studio lighting goes to my living room. Okay, so I have the chassis back in the cabinet here. It was a bit of a fight getting it in because it's really awkward and front heavy. And honestly, I wind up just putting a towel on the top of the cabinet, putting the CRT back in the chassis, clamping it down, and then sort of pulling it all into my chest and then carefully lowering it down. It's a really awkward maneuver, but there's a lot of flex, and the neck can move around a little bit, and I gotta be as careful as I can not to break anything. Anyway, I've got an extension cord run over here because some of the outlets in the living room do not work. And for the life of me, the power switch on this, there must have been a miscommunication in the parts sourcing department, because one person said, well, we want to spec knobs that have a D shaft type of attachment. And then the person that was purchasing the switch decided that they wanted a split end instead of a D shaft, and so the knob on the left side doesn't actually fit, but the inner knob does. So it's goofy, so the knob just kind of falls out. Either way, my Blonder Tongue Agile modulator is underneath us, and it is actively broadcasting the same VHH tape I've been using for everything else, because I don't really have any other options. So let's see if we can find it. I did notice that the volume control is pretty scratchy. Oh, hey, look at that. It turns out plugging the audio and video cables into the modulator tends to help. Just a little bit. So, this is running purely off of the internal antenna. Let's see if the internal antenna adjustment does anything for the slight snow effect we've got. Not really, it's just a gimmick.
Too square and too plain to our eyes. And by American standards, their interiors were distinctly less fancy than most competitors. Which is probably...
Okay, we are right on channel 9.
And much loved Volkswagen Beetle.
Whereas the old Beetle looked like nothing else on the road, though the Rabbit was really the leader of its class in going front-wheel drive box shape. Pretty soon everybody caught up, literally within a matter of 2 years.
I will say, though, it is pretty grainy, and I'm not quite sure if that's because of the broadcast power of the modulator being intended for a closed circuit system in an apartment building instead of being dumped out of a pair of rabbit ears. But hey, it is transmitting audio and video over VHF, and that's pretty cool. I believe once I have all the TV set up in here, I will probably wind up going with a cable system, and I'll just have all the antenna connections through Balin's all linked together and then routed directly to the modulator for maximum signal output. I could set it up here, but really there's no good place to conceal it. and it's not exactly a great looking piece of equipment to put next to all my furniture. But yeah, I think that'll about do it for the Kalmus. I'm just happy to have it back together. I'll need to do a little bit of experimenting and see if bringing the modulator closer together cleans up the snow effect we're seeing here. I didn't do any real alignments to this. I was more or less happy with what I had on the bench, so we'll see. It's not too hard to get to the adjustments. I've got the manuals and everything. But yeah, I think that will about do it. Okay, I wasn't quite happy with how that last shot really looked. Don't touch the tripod. Don't. I'm going to throw off the shot, cat. So, I have a VCR directly connected to the antenna input this time, and I want to see if the picture quality improves when it's not trying to pick up a weak broadcast from through the floorboards. I'm going to get this fired up real quick and make sure it doesn't burst into flame, because it's been a little while since I turned this on last. And I may need to turn off the room lights to actually... Oh, okay. Alright, so tape's going. Let's see if we can't find it. Oh, it's right there. You can just barely see the data for the tape at the top there, kind of lopped off. At least I'm pretty sure that's it. Yeah, it's something. Oh, there we go. The contrast looks like it's cranked up.
Recognizable shape in the world. Well, it's not hard to see why.
I never get tired of this video,
Hi,
though.
I'm Jack Dalby. The Volkswagen Beetle with its putt-putt motor in the back, its utilitarian interior, and its bug-like headlights has been built in more countries in larger quantities for more years than any other car in human history. 21 million Beetles have rolled down the world's highways and byways during the 50s and 60s. Just the name Volkswagen became a synonym for quality and reliability that anyone could afford.
Don't have one. Oh,
Volkswagen
there's
is
height.
the world's fourth largest car company and a big success
There
in
we
other
go.
parts
Get that
of
junk
the
off
world.
the top of the screen.
Hasn't always enjoyed world-class success in America. Oh yes, in the golden age of the 50s and 60s, the Beetle was America's
And let's
leading
try. I'm
importer.
going to shut him up real quick.
But more recent times were troubling for the company.
Let's try a single floor lamp, if the lamp would work. Okay. And I will turn off the overhead and we'll get an idea of how it should look in a more typical setting. Okay, so dim light. This is a fairly dark scene apparently. We will crank the brightness up just a little bit to make it... There we go. Yeah, this knob situation is horrid.
In fact, they look as sleek and competently Germanic as anything in a Mercedes.
So the audio quality is great.
BMW showroom.
Very happy with that. And then the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to unplug this from here, and we're going to move it over to here. If the two balins are got enough room that they won't hit each other. Oh, for crying out loud. Stupid little wire in the middle bent slightly. Huh. I'm actually picking up a signal. I'll be damned. Is it even a channel I would care about?
For everyone, whether you have insurance or not. Next time you need prescription filled, go to
Okay,
Single Care
that
to
actually
make sure
works.
You get the best price.
That's
Visit
great.
singlecare.com
I could at least give
and
Mystery
start
Science
saving
Theater
today.
3000 if I'm lucky.
I set out to find the best source of generic Viagra in 2023.
Good for you. I don't care. Okay, duplicate programming. Oh wait, have I just found the few channels that do exist? I think I have. Oh wait, what is this? What on earth? I was half expecting Vincent Price, but... Okay, we got programming. It looks pretty good. It sounds decent.
Plants are remarkably constructed. Their strong stems secrete an acid enzyme that digests almost anything.
Of course, I haven't had it running very long, so the performance could fall off. So I think I'll sit and watch this for a bit. But yeah, I can see the individual lines on this CRT compared to the 10BP4 on my 9T246. The resolution on it looked great. This set is probably got half the tube count that the RCA does, and I think that's what I'm seeing here is the level of image quality is just not as good. I was thinking maybe it was my equipment. I'm gonna wager and say that this TV just doesn't have that good of resolution. Doesn't have quite as good a look. Maybe that's just something. It's the largest TV I have, so maybe the 21 inches from the period all have that much space between the individual lines, and the smaller CRT you get, the closer together they are. It remains to be seen. I don't have too many that I've actually got working to compare to. I just know that the RCA looked a lot cleaner. But I was also broadcasting to that off of HDMI through a converter that I can no longer find. Either way, this looks great. I am very happy with it, and thanks for sticking around and dealing with all this crap. Next up is going to be maybe another TV. I got a 7-inch Holocrafters to work on here recently, but I have a whole slew of other sets that I can mess with. But yeah. Thanks for watching.